I'm going to tell you a little bit about this book that just came out called Friend and Foe, as Wilhelm mentioned, with my collaborator, Marie Schweitzer. And I want to start off with a little puzzle. I'm going to give you a couple little puzzles today to try to understand this relationship between cooperation and competition. And the puzzle starts with this mob on a particular day in 2008. They all arrived around 3 a.m. in front of a Walmart that was going to open at 5 a.m. in the morning. And about 4 a.m., the cops were called in, but they were basically ineffective. About 4:30, the crowd started chanting, "Tear the doors down." And they literally pulled the doors off the hinges. The employees formed a human shield, which was probably not a good idea. And it's a joke, but sadly, this man actually was trampled to death. And so the question is, what was going on? What led these people to this craziness? Well, it turns out there's an event that happens every year in the United States called Black Friday. Now, we normally associate black with profits in the financial markets, and it's done this idea that consumers are going to get great deals. Now, why do they incite this type of craziness? It's a single word: scarcity. Usually they have only a couple of items at astronomically low prices. $2,000 TVs for $80, but there's only 2 of them. So everyone gets there wanting to be one of those people that get these things. What makes this even more remarkable is it occurs often on the very same day as the most cooperative holiday in all of America, Thanksgiving, where people come together with family and friends. It's the most traveled day. The day before Thanksgiving is the most traveled day in America. And Thanksgiving literally began trying to move competitors, Native Americans and the settlers in the United States, towards cooperation by having this meal together. And so one of the things that's sort of this anomaly is trying to understand how we can switch so quickly from cooperation to competition or back again in some cases. This is not just this one month. It happens every year. You can see this example here with this is 2013, holiday spirits, shootings, stabbings, and brawls, right? So this happens continuously over and over again. I want to give you another example, which I think really captures this idea of how quickly we can switch around. If you ask people in the world, what is your attitude towards America? Do you trust America? There's one country that trusts America more than any other country. And it turns out, I don't know if anyone wants to guess. It's Japan. And this is pretty remarkable because Japan bombed the United States in December of 1941. The United States responded with firebombing 6 to 8 cities and dropping the only 2 nuclear bombs that have ever been detonated. And yet, by 1951, they were already forming collaborative business ventures. This is a light bulb factory. And in 1960, they signed a pact of mutual cooperation. And the question is, how did they get from here to here so quickly? Well, Peter mentioned the idea of rules, and I think rules helped in this case. General MacArthur, who took over Japan after they basically surrendered, had a couple really important rules. One of those rules was no American citizen was allowed to strike a Japanese citizen. That makes kind of sense. But here's another key rule. American soldiers could only eat American rations. They could not touch Japanese food because of the problem of scarcity that existed. And we were able to move that. Now, how many people in this room are parents? Raise your hand if you have a kid. So many of you have kids. It is probably one of the most cooperative things that you can do. You raise this little infant, you cooperate to let it grow into this majestic adult. But what happens at 3 o'clock in the morning? Well, now you fight fiercely over who gets to sleep and who gets to stay awake. How many of you in this room have siblings? So many of you probably have siblings. So siblings, we have brotherly love with this incredible sense of connection. We also have sibling rivalry. Is anyone in this room a twin? So I'm a twin too. Now, twins literally fight for resources in the womb. And in my case, my brother beat the crap out of me. He was 50% larger than I was when we were born. He's still not 50% larger, fortunately, otherwise he'd be pretty big. But you can see this process, and this happens at work, even in academia, right? We cooperate on papers and collaborations, but then Axel and Peter compete for promotions and other resources. And so one of the fundamental themes of this book and of this sort of research program is the idea that every relationship, spouses, siblings, friends, colleagues, are characterized by a fundamental tension between cooperation and competition that's going on all the time, often at the same time. So what do we have to do to be successful? Well, we have to find the right balance between these forces. If we cooperate too much, we can be exploited. If we compete too much, we prevent the possibility of mutual gain. So we need to find this right balance between cooperation and competition. And I'm going to give you just a couple examples about just little summaries of 3 of the chapters from the book to tell you a little bit about how we think about this. And I want to start off with another sort of puzzle. Here's 2 men, Steve and Tom. They were separated at birth and did not see each other until they were in their 40s. Steve was raised on one coast and raised as a Christian. Tom was on the other coast, raised as a Buddhist. And when they met, of course, one of the first questions they asked each other was, what do you do? Steve's like, I own a bodybuilding gym. What do you do? Tom's like, I own a bodybuilding gym. And so the question is, how can it be that twins reared apart are often more similar than twins reared together? Like, how do we explain this puzzle? And I'm going to come back to that by talking about a single thing, which too bad Thomas Musfather isn't here because he studied this for many years, the idea of social comparisons and how they can inspire us and make us miserable at the same time. And just here's a good example of the inspiration aspect of social comparisons. This is Larry Bird talking about his rivalry with Magic Johnson and how it motivated him. The first thing I would do every morning was look at the box scores to see what Magic did. I didn't care about anything else. So when we compare with other people, it can increase our motivation and performance. In one of the studies that I did with Thomas Musfather, we took negotiators and we had some of them focus on their target price, the ideal outcome they could get. And other people, we had them focus on their reservation price, their walkaway point. And we found that people who focused on the target price were more motivated and got better outcomes in the negotiation. So the one thing they can do is they can really help us motivate our performance. But they can also make us miserable. I want to show you a little video, which probably many of you have seen. I know Axel shows it in his classes. But it's a little video that you're going to see what happens to someone when they get a reward that normally they love, and they would appreciate the reward all day long until they see someone else get a slightly better reward. There we go. Oops. We need this thing.
Recently, we videotaped it with new monkeys who had never done the task, thinking that maybe they would have a stronger reaction, and that turned out to be right. The one on the left is the monkey who gets cucumber. The one on the right is the one who gets grapes. The one who gets cucumber, note that the first piece of cucumber is perfectly fine. The first piece she eats. Then she sees the other one getting grape, and you will see what happens. So she gives a rock to us, that's the task. And we give her a piece of cucumber, and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us. And that's what she does. And she gets a grape. And she eats it. The other one sees that. She gives a rock to us now, gets again cucumber.
So you can see this incredible level of frustration, right? Very happy to get the cucumber, eat that cucumber all day long until another monkey, do the same work, give the token, but they get a better reward. And so comparisons can create resentment, spite, dissatisfaction, even unethical behavior. In that study that I just told you with Thomas Musfather, when people focused on their target price, they got a better outcome, but then afterwards they felt less satisfied with that outcome because they now had this upward comparison. You probably know one of the most famous studies of this of all is the looking at silver medalists. In one analysis, silver medalists are objectively better off than bronze medalists in the Olympics. But in one analysis in I think it was the 2004, 2008 games, 90% of gold medalists smiled on the medal stand. 70% of bronze medalists smiled on the medal stand. 0% of silver medalists smiled on the medal stand, right? So we can see this happen. And it can even lead to spite, as we saw with the monkey, literally throwing away a cucumber they had just eaten seconds before. There's a famous Russian parable, which I really love, which is guy rubs a genie, a Russian man rubs a genie, a lamp, and out pops a genie. And the genie says, I'm going to give you whatever you want in the world, with one catch. Your neighbor will get double. So he goes back and forth and he's thinking about it, and then finally says, I got it. I want you to poke out one of my eyes. Right? So to blind the neighbor. So we have motivation, but we also have resentment. So how do we find this right balance between motivation and resentment? And I want to come back to that puzzle that I had before about the twins. Now you might think that twins reared together would be more similar than twins reared apart because they both have a common environment and they have the common genetics. But what happens when they're reared together? Well, they have social comparisons. They see someone else outperform them. When I was 12 years old, I ran a 10K in under 46 minutes. My twin brother ran a 10K in under 43 minutes. By the age of 13, I was no longer a runner. Right? So you can see how I became a wrestler. So we differentiate ourselves as one way to solve this problem of that. Now, one of the biggest things that we have to deal with in terms of the social comparisons is power. And I want to raise the question is, what is power? Now, an economist would say power is a really objective force, right? In bargaining, we can look at the alternatives of buyers and sellers and come up with who has more market power in that situation. We can look at an organizational chart. We can see who controls resources that other wants. We can also see who has the authority to reward or punish or hire and fire people. But one of the things that I've done over the last 15 years of my research is power is not just an objective thing, it's also a psychological variable that can get inside of us. And Joris Lammers, who's in the audience, has done tremendous great work on this topic also. And I want to tell you a little story about Gillian Koo, a former student of mine who's now a professor at London Business School. And in 2004, she went on the academic market and went and gave a job talk at Harvard Business School. And it was a pretty bruising affair. They battered her and they, tried to find all these inconsistencies and contradictions, and she had her confidence hurt a little bit. And she was going a couple weeks later to London Business School. They gave her about a half an hour before her talk, and she decided to use a manipulation that we had used experimentally in our lab, and yours has used and lots of others. She sat down and literally just wrote out about a time in which she had power. And then she went into that room, and she was in complete command. She was able to control the audience, answer questions with great eloquence and sophistication. When people started leading her astray, she brought them back to the point that she wanted to make. And so we decided to test this with a group of French students applying for business school. All of them had an opportunity to do a mock exam. And we had judges, and the judges were told, accept about 50% of the people that you see today. So we just sort of have a common thing. And before they went in the interviews, we manipulated. For some of the people, we had them do exactly what Gillian did. They thought about a time when they had power. Now, some of them, we had them think about a time when they lacked power. Would that make them even worse off? And the others were in our baseline, our control condition. And you can see what happens. In the control condition, about 50% of people got admitted. But it plummeted in the low power condition to below 30%, and it skyrocketed to almost 70% in this situation. So you can see power increases confidence and optimism. That's the good in power. But now I want to tell you a little bit about the bad. And to do that, we're going to do a little experiment. I want you all to hold up your finger just like this, everyone in the room. And I want you to draw a capital letter E on your forehead as quickly as possible. So draw a capital letter E as quickly as possible. So it turns out you can draw this E in one of two ways. One way is the correct way. This is the other focused way. So it's backwards to you, but it's an E to other people. But sometimes you can draw it this way. So it's an perfect E to you, but it's backwards to other people. That would be the self-focused or the wrong E. Now, why am I telling you about this? Well, we did a little experiment many years ago. We brought people in the lab, and we gave some people control over an important resource, lottery tickets. We said, you get to decide how to divide up these lottery tickets between you and another person. The other person was in a low power condition. We told them the other person is going to decide what lottery tickets you get. And these were for real lottery tickets. And then they were in a room by themselves. We asked them to draw a capital letter E on their forehead, just like I asked you to draw them. And in the low power condition, almost no one drew a self-focused E. The majority drew the other focused E. But look what happened in the high power condition. It nearly tripled in value. About 3 times as many people drew a self-focused E simply by randomly assigning them to power. And it makes sense. If I have power over someone, I don't need to take their perspective, right? I can get my own needs met without having to be too concerned with others. So power reduces perspective taking. So how do we find this balance between confidence and self-focus so that we have confidence and other focus? And to do that, I want to tell you a little metaphor that I like to get at this idea. And this is driving a car. To go from point A to point B, what do you need? You need an accelerator. It allows you to zoom down the highway. But if you don't have a steering wheel, you can crash into things along the way. So how do we get acceleration with steering? Well, we need to combine power and perspective taking. And I just want to give you one example of what this might look like. This is from a little article I wrote in the New York Times last year, and the title was, When a Whisper Sounds Like a Shout. And I want to tell you a little story about a former PhD student named Gail Berger from Northwestern. I was a young assistant professor, a second-year assistant professor, so that means I had more power over graduate students, but much less power than the tenured senior faculty that would vote on my tenure one day. And I saw Gail, someone who had less power than me, in the morning, and I said to Gail, hey, can you come by my office? I really need to talk to you this afternoon. Come by about 3 p.m. And I knew something was a little up because she walked in my office kind of like this. She's a little nervous. And it was something really trivial. I can't even remember what it was, but afterwards she looked at me very sternly and said, never do that to me again. I was like, oh my God, do what? She said, never say you need to speak to me without telling me why. The whole day I was like, oh my God, did I do something wrong? Am I going to have resources taken away from me? Am I going to be punished? And I thought, Gail is crazy. She's neurotic. It turns out she is neurotic. She'll admit that, but that's not the point. But the very next day, I got an email from the chair of my department and said, hey, Adam, can you come by my office? I really need to talk to you this afternoon. And I walked into her office and I was like, oh my God, what's going on? What did I do? And again, it was something really trivial. And so we call this the power amplification effect, which is that your behavior when you have power matters a lot more than when you don't have power. Now, let's give you one final example of this, both the good and the bad. The first PhD class I ever took in my life was with Danny Kahneman, who eventually won the Nobel Prize in economics. And on the first day of class, I had this great idea and I shared it with him, and Danny just dismissed it with derision. And I just shrunk into myself, and I didn't speak for the rest of the day, and it was really just traumatic. And then about 3 or 4 weeks later, Danny came up to me in the hallway, and I was just walking by, and he's like, oh, I really loved your reflection paper. It was really well written. And of course, what did I do? Well, I just skipped down the hallways, I called my parents, and Danny Kahneman liked one of the things I wrote, And it shows you how just a little thing, small constructive criticism, can be hugely impactful in a negative way when it comes from power, but something generous like expression of gratitude or praise can have even bigger impact when it comes from power. So the final thing that I want to tell you about today is when we have high and low power people together in a group, that creates a social hierarchy. And I want to give you another little puzzle. Imagine you're a chicken breeder, and you got 3 types of chickens. You got lazy chickens that don't produce eggs. You got anxious chickens who are too anxious to produce eggs, and you got a high egg-producing chicken. Now, if you're like many chicken farmers, you would do this. You would breed for you go from here to here. Sorry, I missed that part. You would breed for the high egg-producing chickens. And what happened is an incredible anomaly, which is that your egg production would actually go down rather than up. And I'm going to tell you why that happened in a minute, but I want you to think, how do we solve that puzzle? And I'll take you to a very new phenomenon that recently happened, which is Zappos announced that they were getting rid of all managers. Zappos is an internet company in the United States that sells shoes, and they said, we have hierarchy, we're rejecting that, we're going with holacracy instead. No managers. Now, typically, every new employee gets an option of quitting from Zappos at a certain point in their training. And if they quit, they get $2,000 or $3,000 and no questions asked. And usually less than 2% of Zappos employees take this offer. Well, when Tony Hsieh, the CEO, announced holacracy, he said, I'm going to give everyone in the firm an option to leave. It's going to be generous. You're going to get 3 months severance package. And on that date in April, when they had decided whether to stay or go, 14% of the entire firm quit. Turns out they didn't like living in a hierarchy-less world. And so we have this anomaly where we say we don't want hierarchy, and yet when we don't have it, we really hate it. And to highlight this, I want to ask you a simple question. Would you rather play a game with your boss or your best friend? Now, most of you, for many of you, Axel is both your boss and your best friend. But for those, but imagine that wasn't true. Most people would say, my best friend. I love my best friend. But let me tell you about this game. This game has two options. Option A gives you more than your partner. Option B gives your partner more than you. And there's two rules to this game. The first rule is no communication. And the second rule is you both have to get you have to make the same decision to get your outcome. If you both choose option A, you both get lottery tickets, you get more than them. But if you both choose option B, you both get lottery tickets, they get more than you. But if one chooses A and one chooses B, you both get nothing. Now, when you play with your boss, it's pretty easy. Your boss probably thinks they deserve option B, and you think they deserve option B. You both select option B. You've coordinated your behavior, even in the absence of communication, because of that pattern of deference. Now what happens when you play with your best friend? You think, I'm going to be generous. I'm going to go with option B. They're like, I'm going to be generous. And they go with option A, and then you both get nothing. Or you say, they're going to be generous, so I'm going to be selfish, but they're thinking the same thing. Again, you get nothing. So you can see this problem of what hierarchy provides. It provides some type of coordination that's available. Now I want to ask, imagine if two bosses played this game. What would it be like? And I'm going to tell you a little study that we did where we took every fashion house that exists in the world over 20 seasons, and there is a Parisian magazine that actually has buyers and journalists rate the creativity of it. And we noticed something really interesting in the data, that when the top executive for creativity, the creative director, was a pair of individuals rather than a single individual, creativity went down. We call this the curse of co-leadership. They were literally less creative when there were two bosses rather than one bosses, presumably for some of these situations that we were just talking about. Now, let me take you to halfway across the world to a date in 2010 when a basketball player named LeBron James decided to take his talents to South Beach, Miami, and join forces with two of the other best players in the world. And immediately there was a concern about this. In fact, we could see it on the very date that they announced it. They said, it's Wade's house, LeBron's kingdom, and Bosch's pit. And as one sports writer said, it can't be all three. And they literally wrote this, until there's a pecking order, there won't be any success at Miami. And it turns out this person who wrote this thing in July was really prescient, because in the next year, in close games, decided by 5 points or less with 5 minutes to go, they were 29th out of 30 teams in winning percentage. They were the second worst team in the league, despite having the most talent, when they had to coordinate their most. So we decided to see, is this generally true? Is sometimes having too much talent, just like with the chickens, is that a problem? So we analyzed 10 seasons of NBA data And what you can see here is that as talent goes up, performance goes up, but only up to a point. And then actually performance goes down. Now, we could also analyze why this occurred, and it goes back to the question of coordination. The teams with too much talent didn't pass the ball very effectively. They had lower number of assists, for example. And we can go back now and think about what happened with the chickens. Well, it turns out something else happened when they bred for the high egg-performing chickens. Not only did egg production go down, but bird mortality went up. The reason why is the highest egg-producing chickens were also the most competitive, dominant chickens, and they literally pecked each other to death. And so what happens in basketball, in this case, is that they are fighting over who gets the ball at the end. What happened the next year? Dwayne Wade hurt his knee, became 70% of Dwayne Wade, solved that co-leadership dueling banjos problem, and they won the championship the next 2 years. Now, I want you to think about a sport, a team sport, that is, they function together as a team, that doesn't require a lot of coordination. And I want you to think about for a second, it turns out baseball. Baseball, I hit, then someone else hits, and we're not fighting over who's hitting when, we just all have an order. In fact, one sports writer said, baseball is an individual sport masquerading as a team sport. So we analyzed the same 10 seasons for baseball, and look at this. The more talent, the better always. So here we can put them together. Basketball requires coordination because it's interdependent. We can get a too much talent effect. Baseball doesn't require any coordination. You can never have enough talent effect. Now, this tells us that hierarchy is good because it helps coordination and cooperation. But I want you to think for a second, when is hierarchy bad? What are the problems with hierarchy? Why do we have this belief that we don't want hierarchy? What does hierarchy hurt? Probably a lot of you will most of the time when I ask this question, the first thing that comes up is, hierarchy hurts with ideas, right? Because low power people don't feel comfortable speaking up. And I want to tell you a little study that we did. We took every expedition that's ever gone up the Himalayas, over 100 years, and we looked to see whether the expedition came from a country that was more hierarchical. And we control for lots of things here. We control for fixed effects, we control for economic values of the country, other cultural values of the thing, features of the expedition from size to oxygen to Sherpas, all of these things. And what we found is that if they came from a country that was more hierarchical, they had people increase the probability that someone would die on the mountain. And our theory is that low power people didn't feel comfortable speaking up when the conditions changed. And we see that, and we can see this sometimes with some of the airline accidents where the co-pilot doesn't speak up. But where we really know this to be true is in hospitals. Nurses have much less power and status than doctors, and this is a huge problem. In surgery, the single biggest problem in surgery is what's called a central line infection. If an infection gets in the central line, you're toast. How do you present it? A 5-step checklist. The problem, doctors don't always follow the checklist. The second problem, nurses don't feel comfortable forcing the doctors to do that. And so then we get to see this increase in mortality. So the bad in hierarchy is it silences low power perspectives, which can lead to disaster. So we need to find the right balance between the coordination benefits of hierarchy without preventing low power voices so that we get all voices heard with coordination. So let's go back to the hospital. What was Johns Hopkins' solution? How did they solve this problem? Well, they came up with a pretty ingenious one. They said, you know what? The nurses, you're in charge of the checklist. Gave them some authority and some power. Let me give you another example of how we can do this. Research shows very clearly that when we collect information privately rather than publicly, people feel more comfortable when they lack power of sharing their perspectives. So collecting information privately. And I just want to give you one other example of how the rules, we've heard a lot about the rules before, can really make a difference. This is a TV show called The Shield, and the producer of The Shield noticed something in the pitch meetings is that the women in the group rarely spoke up in pitching ideas. And so he said to them, I'm going to be a great leader. And he went to them and said, I want you all to feel comfortable speaking up. And they laughed in his face. They said, watch what happens when we do. And he did. And he noticed that whenever the women started to pitch an idea, a man would steal it from them, or override them, or not listen to them, or interrupt them. So what he did is he came up with a new rule: no interruptions during when someone's pitching an idea. And two things happened from this. The first, the women felt more comfortable speaking up, and he created fairness and equality in speaking. The second thing is everyone's ideas got better because they had some space to communicate. So in life, what we need to do in every relationship is we need to find this right balance between cooperation and competition to be successful. And this is in every relationship, from spouses to siblings to friends to colleagues. And when we find that right balance, we get the best outcomes in life. So thank you very much.